Daniels here. Correctivity in homeostasis, therefore sovereignty of the DNA nations. Well, this is interesting. I never had this happen before, where I got called away and missed the the scheduled opening of the show. So we'll see how it affects. We're here now, and we do have some important correctives to apply of recent podcasts and articles, particularly those of others. I have some things to address from a recent posting of, hey, how's my sound? Some things to say about recent postings of Guest Worker, of Keith Woods, of Semiagog. Glad you appreciate it. Yes, I know it's Super Sunday for some. I thought it was last Sunday. But that was shows how much of a football fan I am these days. It's a good sign. I take it that I don't know exactly when the Super Bowl is happening. Still sipping my coffee. Getting settled in here. Bully Bumpa. Interesting name. Is it Aborigine? Like Yuan Gulagang? Let me take a look at my notes first of all. Seems the Z-Man is another person I have to comment on. He's taking another and as much as he may be applying to white postmodern angles that I'm taking, he might be trying to reapply the red cape interpretations of some things in order to fit that characterology of that these people are subscribing to in order to maintain their kosher standing. The Z-Man who happily appears, who posts on Tacky's Mag, which is altogether kosher, and is there doing podcasts with none other than Kato and Godfried. So he's another one that I've got a remark on this week. Okay, then. So which do we start with? I didn't have much of a remark about Keith Woods, so we'll go there. Now Keith Woods is actually coming from something of a Marxist perspective originally, and he's not taking the advice of mine and forbears and moving toward an application of let's call it leftist perspective to ethno-nationalism. Which would be a whole different creature than Marxism or cultural Marxism. Of course, still, non-supremacist. Not at all advocating the killing, let alone genocide of others, and not even the exploitation of others. Rather having the accountable means for correctivity and capacity for not only sovereignty but negotiation with other peoples in their autonomy as well. He strangely, in his last talk, and I think I might attribute this to his age, inexperience. Maybe he's going through some contortions in order to maintain his status on YouTube and not trigger the censors. But I don't. It sounds to me like he's more sincere, and he's showing his little feet of clay there and getting distracted into some foolishness. Namely, whereas I've been saying that the crucial starting point for the kosher marketing campaign against the so-called left, that is a characterology of the left for old reactionary WN to hold up as the enemy, would be 2008, of course, when they, through the bailout of the banksters, in what was apparently one of the greatest thefts ever, emerged in their greatest niche hegemony ever. That is, hegemony in their niche power and influence in their 10 or so niche positions. And through which their biopattern reconstructs. Whereas I see the date to look at is 2008, that crisis, and what it is they don't want us to do, of course, is to adopt the depth grammar of the left to unionize in our interests and thereby structure our means of accountability and therefore correctivity and therefore homeostasis and therefore autonomy and therefore sovereignty of our species systemic. Keith Woods was talking about somehow 2010 being the crucial starting point, and the Occupy Wall Street, which he felt was partly astroturf, as I gather, and partly bona fide grassroots thing. This little campaign there against the 1% of banking elites. Now, obviously there were astroturf influences there, Soros and so on, and I long ago talked about it with the encouragement of TT, in the sense of that we were interested in, to the extent that we might, co-opting that perspective. And Keith Woods apparently acknowledges that there was some genuine participation there. But then he says, and this is where he gets ridiculous. He says that at that point, the corporations played a game. At that point, the corporations saw the need for a false dialectic. And that through and that is when emerged, he seems to say, through social media, the phenomenon of what is being called wokeism, which is the current provided meme for what was once political correctness, and then and 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 then and still is, I think, cultural Marxism. He says no, there was some source to this in the, or some precedence in the Frankfurt School. Right? He acknowledges that. Thanks, Keith. But really, really the culture is downstream from media. Now that's the ridiculous part, as if this really inanimate these inanimate media structures, there's Twitter or Instagram, whatever else he cites, would be, in a sense, dictating these cultural phenomenon, these rule structures. It's like the medium is the message, kind of Martin McLuhan kind of thing almost, which is absurd. These structures might facilitate the channeling of cultural Marxism and corporate interests, which from the perspective here would be the right wing and liberal interests, to sell out the interests of our peoples, our species. But they are the ones who are basically allowing for how these structures are used. They are the ones with agency, or greater agency, greater functional range of autonomy. In the control of these social media outlets. And the reason why I mention it is because I think that Keith Woods is doing a great disservice in distracting from the angle that I'm taking. Apparently, and he's probably doing this just to, if I can guess, to gain approval of those who want him to maintain this third position, basically to distract from the position here, because it is the best position, the best platform. We see what's going on. So So he wants to stay in their good graces, and it's a shame that he's maintaining that right with that that stance against the characterology of the left, and according to in compliance with the parameters given by the kosher folk. Distracting from where these masters of where these masters of discourse are setting the parameters and how. And again, it matters because I said, like, the guy is getting what 20,000 views and so on, and 10,000 likes, whereas we're getting just a handful here. And like I said, okay, he has talents and energy, but I'm comfortable in disputing the idea that he is that much more worth listening to than yours truly. I really don't think so. On the contrary. Okay, so that out of the way, we know that yes, Keith Woods is fallible. Little piker. It wants to say a culture is downstream from social media. That's ridiculous, and that it all started in 2010. Just bypassing the thesis. Bypassing the thesis that 2008 was the starting point of this marketing campaign. That's when you had the beginning of the talk from Paul Gottfried and then Richard Spencer of the alternative right, which was a got-up version of paleoconservatism. And Keith Woods is doing a little bit of a paleocon thing too there. So come to think of it, third positionism would be something that is prone to get mixed up. Paleoconservatism is a kind of third positionism. You're mixing in right-wing elements, notably Christianity, and then the natural fallacy of the Enlightenment. In some cases, maybe not Gottfried's of Nazism, but you'll have some of that Nazi apologetic with Keith Woods and the like. No, it's a shame if you want to hear some really clever. If you want to hear someone really clever, much more clever than Keith Woods, you'll listen to a podcast by Metzger going back on from May 1st, 2017. There he's talking about 12 international corporations, transnational corporations being and their influence the Fortune 500 companies. Now, again, we're not advocating. We've criticized, much as I recognize TT's intelligence. We've made the remark that he was coming from times when there was a desperation for voice, and therefore lone wolf activism, to use a euphemism, seemed to be in the more radical, in the more violent sense, seemed to be the only way of expressing voice. We don't need that now, and so we can renounce that as a means to an end. To be clear that it's only in self-defense ever. Okay. Let's move on to the next thing that we wanted to talk about. I've criticized Semiagog as a reactionary who's looking to, very much like guest worker from Majority Rights, to foundationalize he's looking to establish a foundation beneath language, what he calls a non-arbitrary foundation of, I guess, our boundaries beneath language. And he draws upon the examples, literally, of wolves doing their territorial pissings, and how they would not only mark the place, but but hierarchy, according to how high the piss on a tree goes. I mean, it's that what they're calling spurg-like. But what was what's ridiculous and where he's coming from. I wanted to point out to listeners is he ridicules the anthropocentric perspective, and which would exactly be the perspective that we should be applying as a corrective, not just any anthropocentric perspective, but our anthropocentric perspective. That would be an expression of white postmodernity proper. That is, we're establishing the calibration there with our group interests, our species interests, and in process form, our systemic homeostasis. I mean, because when he's arguing against anthropocentric, what is he doing? What are we supposed to make the center? Animals? Physics? Something. Sure, he's not saying something beyond nature. I don't think that he's a religious guy in that sense. Typical stupid right-wing reaction you have there. A reaction to rhetorical abuse from our enemies. This is a kind of let's stop short of calling it stupid, but this is a reaction that Bowery's gotten caught up in as well. It becomes and guest worker, but they're virtually phobic of language and rhetoric for the way it's been abused against European folk, and for the skill that the kosher folk wield in abusing and weaponizing language against us. So you try to foundationalize within sublinguistic nature. It's a ridiculous response, and it's not going to be immune to allegations that this is nevertheless arbitrary and attacks. It's not necessary. As I said, we are warranted. There is warranted assertability in our claim that there are boundaries, that there are patterns that are valid, fair, operationally verifiable. You might want to, it's always, it can always be beneficial to add more concrete detail to that pattern. More genetic data is always welcome. But we certainly have enough to begin. And in a sense, there has to be a humble recognition that there's not going to be some purely objective claim that everybody is going to fall in line with, just in awe, that blows away all potential linguistic abuse. That is to say, there's going to be an admission from the part of our people that a certain amount of rhetorical advocacy is going to remain necessary. Okay. The central point there is that it's absurd for Semyagog to be ridiculing the anthropocentric perspective. That should be our perspective. Now, if you take a proper anthropocentric perspective, the calibration there, again, this is the difference of our position, our left ethno-nationalism, from the characterology. We do apply objective to truth inquiries, but as feedback, not as our identity. no, we calibrate, we gauge those objective truth inquiries against the calibration of our anthropocentric worldview, which then means that if we concern, therefore, about our relative interests, in fact, we rather quickly gather that if we destroy our habitat, we destroy ourselves. So it's readily connected to brute objective facts that we can't ignore for our relative interests. So it's anthropocentric, yes, but that doesn't mean it's divorced and detached from concerns about our relation, our part, rather, in nature, our relation and our part in nature. Again, the idea is that you want to rhyme with nature and even adhere to nature where it is conducive to our relative interests, but not where it veers into natural fallacy or it is below our human capacity to make adjustments for the sake of our survival and advancement. Now, okay, that pretty much, that's bringing me to where I wanted to talk about, I wanted to address guest workers. Latest few articles, guest worker from Majority Rights, guest worker who I've been calling interchangeably asshole, and unfortunately, deservedly so. And that hasn't changed, despite the fact that I'm sure that he believes his latest articles about British nationalism and Heidegger just to vindicate him. It isn't true. And he once said to me that, I mean, he's just in his absurd competitiveness, his narcissistic personality disorder, really, that where he's blinded himself to the fact that the things that I talk about are not only conducive but necessary for British as much as any other nationalism, and not contra to anything that he should be interested in that regard as a British nationalist. That but he can't see that. You know, his autobiography requires, his reactionary autobiography, really, in its genesis, requires that he set me up as a foil, and therefore he has to straw man everything that I say. And this is going on for for years. At first, I was mystified. Why is he not seeing what I'm saying, seeing the good in it, the importance and the difference of it, and infusing that with confirmation and elaboration? Why is he rather looking for any way that he possibly can to render a negative interpretation on what I'm saying? After I got over the mystification of it and realized that's what he was doing, that he's just an asshole, I basically got to a point where I ignored it because I could post articles anyway. I'm just like, oh, this is what he's going to do. After years of it, I said, okay, we'll start a new site. This guy's he's not going to stop that, and he's got Nazis like Al Ross, people who love Hitler, and Jesus people like what's his name, Thorne over there, who and that ilk, who are endorsing his antagonism of me for their reasons, while he has antagonized what I'm saying basically for his egocentric reasons. And he told me while I was engaged in fights over the years, and the few times that I talked to him, he told me that I was going to be hurt ultimately by his articles when he put them up. When he finally came down to his posting what he calls his ontology stuff of his ontology project, and what he calls ethnic nationalism. I was quite sure then that he was not going to do anything that hurt me, in the sense of I felt like, wow, he really showed me to be the fool and he's got it all right. I was sure then, and I'm the one who's vindicated now that I see what he's put up. Is what you have is just more GW doing GW. Now, what that means is you've got in GW a right-wing reactionary and a STEM guy. Someone who's got more of an aptitude for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or even if he's not great in that, that's his predilection. Reacting to the kosher academics in the humanities and sociology and the like, putting up these red capes, these abuses of social advocacy and weaponization thereof against European peoples. His autobiography is developed in reaction to those red capes, so much so that he wants to believe that those red capes are what the humanities are about, that therefore the humanities are all hogwash. All the kosher ruse. And despite the fact that it's explained to him how these ideas are supposed to be applied in the interests of European peoples, he won't hear it because it doesn't serve his autobiography. He can even ignore the fact that, despite the fact that he's just completely resentful of academia and considers all academia to be complete 100%, 1,000% kosher deception that's got to be swept aside in favor of the of him, basically. There's one. He will ignore the fact that Heidegger was very much an academic, and coming from a discipline which would be considered within the humanities, of course, philosophy. So anyway, GW being GW, isn't able to see, and coming from outside of academia and not penetrating enough in his thinking to see the construction of ideas, and like a true novice, like a child, even wanting to treat these things as found objects. These ideas as found objects. Then proceeds to look upon everything in accordance with his reaction as rhetorical abuse, even where he should be able to understand that what I'm doing is not he should be able to appreciate that what I'm saying is not antagonistic. But he does want to treat it that way, and it's pathological to the extent that he does that. But anyway, wanting to stay within the provided language games, not treat them as language games, not even recognize them as language games. What he does is he manicures these ideas. So he's manicuring he's providing a fine manicure to Heidegger. But he's not penetrating to the gist of it. In other words, he's providing the thousandth, 100,000th explanation of Heidegger. And where he does add something new is not any good. In the few places that he does add something or kind of remark aside from Heidegger. I'll get to that in a minute. Because he wants to treat these things like the engine that he works on in his garage. This is what he likes to do, to take apart car engines and so on. And he wants to treat society like that as well. He wants to work it to work like a car engine, like this inanimate object that won't play games like the kosher folks do. So anyway, okay. So this is the way he's looking at Heidegger, and what he does do, and where his postings on nationalism and on Heidegger might be of some help, irrespective, is in its prelude and laying out what most everybody worth their salt in nationalism, myself included, is saying, that we have a problem with our elites in not being concerned, in fact, being antagonistic to our interests, the interests of our peoples. And with his manicuring fastidiousness, he provides an eloquent and could be rousing statement of that. Fine and good, if that inspires people. The way he puts it is nice English language. However, when it comes to his application of Heidegger, which he seems to deem just about the only worthy philosopher worthy of serious consideration. I mean, he's even said to me, remarked that Aristotle is simply not relevant. Never mind. So he's talking about Dasein, their being, and the only thing that he does in his discussion, well, I would say the only thing that he does. What I might have done more of in my discussions of Heidegger is, or in my applications of Heidegger to our interests, it's more like it, is emphasize how it is that Heidegger associates the word care with a capital C to Dasein, to their being. Now, I've noted, whereas GW can't bring himself, except in his awkward and stupidly titled thing that talks about the mind-body problem, which is not an articulate statement of the Cartesian problem at all. But besides that, a guest worker can't bring himself to acknowledge that what Heidegger was doing was taking a postmodern turn in response to Cartesian estrangement, in calling attention to Dasein, really calling back attention to Das, to their being, drawing back from that Cartesian estrangement. And it's always been, and I have in fact at times in certain articles talked about care being a part of that, but care has always been implicit, readily implicit in the idea of Dasein drawing attention back to application of our relative interests to the gauge of our group interests, our what Heidegger calls Mitsein, our being within our people. So even at that, guest worker is not doing anything new. At best, he's just manicuring what's already been done. But worse than that, yes, Aristotle, Bully Bumpus says Aristotle is a giant whose work cannot be ignored. That's absolutely true. And moreover, Heidegger didn't ignore his work. Heidegger was, even though he at times steps outside, looks outside of Aristotle, he's working within the Aristotelian framework very much. That's the postmodern correction, really, is bringing our perspective back into praxis, and this is what Heidegger is doing. What Aristotle called praxis, that is the social centralization of the social perspective, or what Aristotle might have called the political perspective, but it's a social perspective, and he's putting us on the proper epistemic grounds. Unlike GW, who's almost trying to treat the social world like as close as he possibly can to a matter of physics, pure cause and effect. Aristotle would call that an epistemological blunder, and Bateson would call that an epistemological blunder. Because the social world is a little bit different, and it requires practical judgment, the kind of judgment that guest worker doesn't have, and that's why he's, for Bowery to refer to guest worker as a philosopher is a travesty. He's nothing of the kind. Anyway, so this is what guest worker does. He provides a fine manicure to found objects, and it was very difficult for me impossible in fact for me to not only post articles unfettered by his endless attempts to deconstruct and strawman, but to try to do podcasts with him. You couldn't prepare with GW because it would just be you'd just be listening to him talk about his zazen of philosophy, and I can't do podcasts that way with someone who's not prepared to understand what I'm talking about. it's either going to be that, it's either going to be preparation or someone who's capable of editing the show afterward. And his idea of editing was to manicure, to take out the dead space, the ums and ahs, and with no understanding of the content of what you're trying to get at. So you would have a content level disaster, but very, very with all dead air taken out. Anyway, so the podcast with him mainly stink very, very badly, infuriating. Marshall, or hi, Marshall. Anyway, so you have so this is where he's coming from. He wants to treat. It's a kind of intellectual laziness. He's treating these things as almost like a hobby. I know he's passionate about this hobby, but nevertheless, like a hobby. This is not really not his radical concern to understand these things. He's not understanding these things in a radical way. He's treating them as found objects. So the kosher folks give him an idea, he reacts to an idea, and he manicures it. So much so that ridiculously, he wants to treat only the emergentism of Heidegger as valid. Again, because that you're talking in emergentism, there you can look upon you might look upon the pre-verbal stuff, the inborn are given inborn capacities and the teleology thereof. The same kind of thing that Semyagog would be enamored of, that Bowery would be enamored of. These people are bedeviled by kosher rhetoric. They just can't stand it, and they're chasing these red capes like crazy. So he wants to. So with that, he wants to sweep aside. Even this is where the sine qua non of his posting is to say that he wants to do away with the whole back and forth. Now, what he's talking about there is that he wants to do away with the hermeneutics, what Heidegger called the hermeneutic circle, or the hermeneutic, what I call the hermeneutic circularity, the process, the other non-Cartesian aspect of the hermeneutic turn, of the postmodern turn, which is the hermeneutic turn, our linguistic and analytic capacity, distinctly human capacity. He wants to sweep that aside as completely affected and say, and I can't believe that he doubled down on this, because it's such an obvious absurdity that he's been engaged in for years. And when I called attention to it, I thought that he'd be embarrassed enough not to double down on it, but he has. He talks about, the only right being the right of people to fight for their survival. And this is ridiculous. Where in the world does that right come from? Where there is such a thing, it's obviously negotiated. And I use that term loosely, negotiated, because it might be you might have to literally fight for it. But it's negotiated with other people through, interactive engagement. But he can't bear to acknowledge that. It must come of, everything has to come from, our inborn emergent qualities to him. Otherwise, it's bad. It's confected. So he criticizes this, and he once tried to, one of the straw men that he applied to me when I talked about the grace that the hermeneutic process entailed of moving back and forth as need be from broad perspective, speculation, if you will, historical perspective on the systemic dynamic in its expanse, and moving back to rigorous application and verification to a molecular and genetic level, even in its empirical reality and proof. He tried to say that this was a clunky thing, back and forth, because he can't get out of the Cartesian mindset. His only way of reacting is to say that adaptation that adaptation provides a unbroken continuity. Right? That's his quote, answer to the quote mind-body problem. And of course, this is ridiculous, and you can see where he's getting. You can see readily the limitation of his singular focus on the one pole of emergentism. Important though that is, and it's also non-Cartesian by its own definition, that it's not enough. You need the hermeneutic aspect as well. It's applied to the individual. You have the corporeal self and the autobiographical self, right? And they're both necessary for authentic existence, transcendent of animal arbitrariness. You want to hold fast and adhere to emergent trajectory as to rhyme with that, with your nature, of course, but you can't count on it alone, because we're in a situation with other people where we have to maintain that coherence through language and the coherence that hermeneutics affords. Hermeneutics can and has been abused against us. I talk about the red capes, for example. There are also tangles and dilemmas and contradictions, confusions that can occur in language, but these things can also be sorted out with proper use of language, and need to be. Holding fast alone to emergentism won't do it, and it won't guarantee that people will act. This talk about Dasein as care will not ensure that people act as GW wants them to. They're still going to be subject to rule structures which might reasonably imply that adaptation, that fitness, means that an English woman marry a Nigerian. Particularly in the disorder of modernity, that might be what seems to be the adaptative move. She might turn on the Super Bowl today and say, okay, yeah, Cooper Kupp is a good receiver and Stafford's good quarterback, but look at all those Nigerians on defense. They're talented too, and they're making millions of dollars too, and these guys are big and strong and add amenities. There's all things that can be said and are being said in the name of anti-prejudice. So, yes, what Heidegger meant was to hold fast to the form of his people, and he's drawing back from Cartesian estrangement in the postmodern turn. You can almost say return to praxis. What he calls Mitdesign. But Heidegger was also noting the necessity of hermeneutics in liberation from mere facticity. Now, Heidegger could have been, I'm not duty-bound the way Guestworker sees himself to Heidegger, to where I'm going to follow him no matter what. So it seems to me that he wasn't quite social enough in comparison to what we need as a corrective. Individualism should not be, of course, our main thrust at this point. Our individualism is going to be protected by the establishment of boundaries at any rate. But hermeneutics is necessary for a liberation from mere facticity. Okay, you, white boy, are a member of a group that is going to be very underrepresented in these glorified sports like the Super Bowl compared to Africans. And that's a fact. and they're making zillions of dollars, and they're having, and these days, because things, politics being what they are, modernity being what it is, based on an objectivist basis, ignoring, prohibiting even the delimitation of group boundaries and protection of group patterns, and subject to them to this experiment and the disorder. It's a fact that there are going to be very few white wide receivers like Cooper Kupp. Almost no white defensive backs, and the adulation. I mean, how many people are going to be attending to this? And the money. That's, this in sports being just one example. You say, well, we can move on to other examples. There are other facts. It's a fact that Africans have evolved hundreds of thousands of years prior to European differentiation. And might be in some ways stronger. Does that mere fact and the fact that we are thrown into engagement mean that our group pattern is not worth protecting against episodic defeats for the ways in which they might be better than us, for rather the sake of our patterns, which might even be better than theirs in other more important ways. Certainly they're better as far as we're concerned, if we care to survive, right? Certainly in our qualities. And but necessary, liberation from mere facticity is necessary for coherence, for group coherence. It's not going to be maintained. Perspective, the perspective necessity in the punctuation is necessary. It's not going to be inherent in mere and sheer emergent qualities, whether individual or group. It's got to also participate in that hermeneutic realm. And that's where that's where we have talk of our history and projection into our future. That's where we establish the quote fiction of our union, what Locke would have seen as a fiction of group boundaries, and what GW would see in his reaction as something that's not natural. I mean, is that stupid in not getting this non-Cartesian structuring and the necessity of it for accountability to our social capital, to our genetic capital. um, GW wants to say that his concerns, for emergentism are prior. And that's an expression of his philosophical inaptitude. It's the prior, even in accordance with Heidegger, the radical prior is the thrownness. In other words, this existential situation. And what Heidegger, of course, means by that is a certain amount of arbitrariness to the circumstances in which we find ourselves. What Kant would accurately call the empirical realm, and what he tried to rescue us from with his noumena. But as Heidegger correctly notes, that's still Cartesian. Kant was still Cartesian. And so there are two responses to the Cartesian estrangement. Vico being the first major challenge to this. Again, taking the Aristotelian perspective and bring this back to re-centralization of praxis. And Heidegger is playing the same, is doing the same thing. He's taking the same perspective, the same framework. One way to stave off misdirection first of all by Cartesian estrangement, and secondly by what Heidegger called the they, or what might otherwise be abuses of social rhetoric. Abuses of rhetoric would be the holding fast to our inborn qualities, to our emergent qualities. But the other, and somewhat downplayed, true, would be the hermeneutic process, the hermeneutic circularity, which Heidegger did engage, although he was, I think, concerned that Dilthey was prone to detach that too much from, well, what we would say, I don't know that Heidegger would quite say that, detach that too much from our inborn nature. And that might well have been true, but that's not the way, then that's not the way that hermeneutics should be applied. Then that would be veering towards Cartesianism itself. If you are detaching from our nature, our inborn nature, and nature otherwise. In fact, you can't detach it. That's why you have to engage in a process. Detach from it. That's why you engage in a process. A hermeneutic process of understanding and making sense. Even the emergent realm is immersed in this interaction. And immersed in social circumstance. Now, this is where Heidegger may have been going, probably was going in an errant direction. Really helpful, a philosopher though he was, still too individualistic, still too seeking, still too much concerned to anchor peoples, let's say in his case he was concerned with German peoples, to anchor them in a perfect union with nature. Now this would have been, even if GW would like that with his kind of absurd antisocial stance in reaction to kosher abuses of social advocacy. Even if GW would like that, not only would GW be wrong, but Heidegger would be wrong if you took that too far. We would be going into the realm of natural fallacy. You're going, and we don't have to accuse him of necessarily going to the same place that Hitler was going with natural fallacy, but this is, that's the direction that you're going in. Your adultish adherence to the call of nature without the intelligence of human correctivity and social negotiation and its accountability. One of the stupidest things of GW's arguments against me is that if I take something from Heidegger or any other thinker or philosopher, I automatically know he's going to think that I am duty bound to follow that philosopher in down the logic and meaning of every jot and tittle of his entire philosophy. That I must be in agreement, or I am just, in his words, making some kind of Frankenstein of my philosophy. For some reason, he says that you can't do that, and this is just utterly stupid. Even Heidegger would suggest that thinking, what he calls in the wisdom of language thankian, means that you set things out of a philosophy. You see what's interesting, what's of the essence, inter esse. You take what you need, and you give thanks. You hold fast to it and you give thanks. In other words, you're not necessarily taking everything, even from Heidegger, according to Heideggerian philosophy. At any rate, I certainly, would not feel obligated to follow Heidegger to this quest that GW feels for a pure foundation in nature, as if that's going to provide a perfect guidance to for our people's sake. Again, that's not to say that you don't, at one end of the hermeneutic circle, want to view nature and harmony with nature as an important guide. An important corrective. But obviously, and it's to the level of common sense. You're not going to just you're not going to just follow. Well, I'm not going to take a bath because that's not natural. I'm just going to let the oils and juices flow, right? Let the wouldn't want to cover up those pheromones. Buli Bompa says Daniel is the deepest thinker in the alt-right. I'm not. I've always been anti-alt-right. Buli Bompa. It's like, I told you what the alt-right is. I'm not. I've never been a member of it. I've always been outside of that and critical of it. It is a name given to the marketing campaign of paleoconservatism 2.0 that Paul Gottfried saw fit of because in reaction to the vast destruction of the neocons and of the cultural Marxists, of course, before them, the breakart Marxists. It's a false opposition, paleoconservatism. And he and his kind wanted to not only do damage control, but prop up this other hand of the false opposition, paleoconservatism being one false opposition to neoconservatism. By giving it some spunky, rebellious sounding, youthful memes, introducing a youthful element, and providing with some memes like social justice warriors and red pills and blue pills and what's the other favorite meme? I had one good one. What was it? Conservative. But anyway, that was they had their alt-light tent. It was a tentosphere, and so they're adding a few more tents to the Pelican. The Paleoconservatism always had one tent for the various Christians. That was part and parcel of it to begin with. Even though Christianity is liberal, because you're supposed to love everybody and not really discriminate on the basis of your group delimitation. So that can't be too conservative, can it? It's universal. But anyway, so this was Frank Meyer's paleoconservatism and Paul Gottfried's paleoconservatism. They're taking basically the Enlightenment ideals that America is founded on, and you're mixing them up with Abrahamic religion. But add to that new tents, the alt-light, which was kosher tent, and then one tent that began to play around with neo-Nazism. I don't think that Gottfried would have been too happy about that, but he would have been like, I think that he would have hoped that that tent would be trying to soften the anti-German aspects of anti-Nazism. That's not how it played out. Some of the what happened was germinated a tent for true believers in Nazism, and also, of course, some kosher folks promoting Nazism because they want to maintain that association with white nationalism, because they know that it's going to destroy any capacity to for coordination among white nationalists and with stable and reliable others. Maybe Islam would be okay with that, but not too many sane others. So there was that. There was a neo-Nazi element added to the alt-right that Mike Enoch is encouraging, and Richard Spencer was whatever enough to go along with. So anyway, the alt-right as though it went down with what they call Hellgate, and Richard Spencer doing the stiff arm salute with his NPI conference. Hail Trump, hail our people. And Charlottesville. It's being remarketed as a dissident right, and they're pretty much the same. It's the same kind of crowd, basically the same tentosphere as the alt-right. Really, it is. There's not that much difference. They're just as stupid, and they're just as duty bound to Gottfried's framework against this characterology of the left. They're all drawing characters of this is what the left is. The left doesn't deal with nature. The left doesn't deal with reality. The left is these social justice warriors. We have to be against this. We are objective. We are about nature. We are about pure facts. And it's amazingly dumb. And this is where that kind of guest workers application really is half-assed interpretation of Heidegger and his shallow interpretation of Heidegger. That's how it's working within that framework, like a true boomer reactionary. Again, the big problem with boomers of that type is that not only were they lucky from a generational position where things fell into their lap, being on the victorious side of war and not having as much competition around and having opportunities presented to them, especially if you were in the STEM fields as someone like a guest worker. That could be very profitable, and things could, the Austrian school stuff could seem, hey, this is true. I'm getting rich. Things are really good. This is the way things work. And then in turn, the problems that occur in the social realm aren't in part due to his irresponsibility, to his selfishness, to his uncaring, to his egotism, the egotism of his self-actualization, and his human potential. No. It's all these social justice warriors who are dealing with reality. Basically, the red caping of social advocacy and the weaponization of social advocacy against whites, he's seeing that as the problem and not a misrepresentation and not a dereliction of responsibility to engage, to allow for, at very least, and not obstruct as he has done, the necessary social correctives on behalf of our people. No. What we need is more of the same modernity. And he does in these recent articles continue to try to find, in his words, these Heideggerian foundations, which can't be abused by the postmodernists. That's the way he puts it. Because when he talks again, so when he's talking about postmodernity, he's talking about the red caping of postmodernity, not postmodernity that as it was supposed to be, even by Heidegger, who would be a seminal point in the postmodern turn. He insists on you can't explain it enough. It will not penetrate his boomer skull. I knew there was a problem early on. Among the first articles that I posted at Majority Rights was the retooling of Maslow's hierarchy, where I'm observing that the most basic requirements, needs, as Maslow calls them, are not what the preeminent needs are not biological food and safety strictly. The most fundamental basic level of need is social, what Heidegger would call Mitsein, being amidst your folk, beginning with your parents, of course, and then the network of people that they rely upon to maintain themselves as a species. You know, a baby is not going to have food and shelter without its parents, and they in turn are not going to be able to sustain themselves without a social network. So that's the most fundamental realm. And again, this social realm, this basic realm, to maintain itself, requires classification. This anti-Cartesian move of classification after a point, what I call unionization, in order to establish human accountability. And again, Z-Man tried to steal this idea from me, but it's mine. Because if you don't have that, you don't make that group delimitation, then you are social. What your would-be social accountability is diffused into an ever-lowering common denominator, which becomes more and more close to brute animal commonality. Less with our mature state, less dealing with the reality of the differing rates of maturity, say between Europeans, Asians, Africans. And differing rates of sublimation. Now, that group delimitation, that unionization, may have a modicum of arbitrariness to it that upsets semiagog, probably guest worker. But as far as we are humans now, there's no getting around it that while there is a clear and warrantably assertable difference between us and other and Africans, say, and Asians, we can't interbreed with them, and therefore, arguments can be made that we are not a different species, but we are all one, and it's how terrible it is to discriminate. That no, we're not going to diffuse our humanness. But these are not very good arguments at all. And so we can't argue, but nevertheless we can't avoid the possibility of antagonists making these arguments. However, what we can do by asserting these lines is recognize our agency in the matter and our capacity not only to adhere in a straitjacket way to our emergent qualities, but to in a way that is very even more authentic, even more in the sense of alternative range of functional autonomy, is wrest our historical and systemic coherence from the arbitrary thrownness, from the mere facticity. And as such, structure accountability, and therefore correctivity, and therefore homeostasis, which is synonymous with functional autonomy and sovereignty of our species. Okay. Now, again, I was criticizing guest worker did not appreciate the profundity of the retooling of Maslow's hierarchy and setting the social as the preeminent level. You could almost say is the one important reality, the most important reality, along, or one pole, an important people in conversation. With that, we begin to correct the narrative of self-actualization of the human potential movements, the pursuit of happiness that was so, and individual rights that's so central, whether naively of the Enlightenment or weaponized by the kosher folks, so central to the ensuing destruction and disorder of modernity. The Locketean empirical notion that group classifications are fiction, the kosher weaponization of that they are egregious fictions, that they are racist, that they are against civil rights, um, we begin to correct this popular these popular ideas of the human potential movement, of Americanization, of liberalization. With the retooling of Maslow's take on the process of self-actualization, taking the self, in fact, away as the central concern, making the social as the central outlook. So you're not going to have any European style individualism unless we have our social bounds and borders. And contrary to what Guestworker stupidly did in his initial criticism of this concern, he tried to say this was a garden variety concern. Well, the concern for self-actualization is so not garden variety. It's so deeply European as to go back to Aristotle. Now, Aristotle had the task before us is we're needing to retool the concept, not only in correction of Maslow's modernist take on it. Also, we have to make certain, even though it's not as bad, and looking at it of itself provides some correctives to Maslow, that is, Aristotle does. Aristotle's take on self-actualization needs some adjustments as well, being the traditional, the telos, that might, in a kind of awkward way, he would recognize it's occurring in praxis, and therefore apply biological criteria to its proper realization, and as mammals in specific relational concern, differentiating us from animals as distinctly human. Furthermore, in our capacity to learn. Nevertheless, there are hermeneutic corrections, nevertheless, and postmodern corrections, nevertheless, that are required, even of the Maslowian take on actualization. And we can see this working as corrected as such. We can see this working as a process wherein actualization, if it's to have any have any reality and or any possibility and any meaning even uh, requires the preliminary setting forth of the social delimitation. Then you could talk about biological needs in reality, because you have somebody to talk about it with, for one thing, right? You have parents who've allowed you to survive, right? And people that they could uh, negotiate with to get the things that they needed. Uh, you know, enough of a gene pool to not have an inbred child, for one thing. Uh, so so where was I? Um, so I'm seeing we're seeing the social as the not only the most basic level, but the framework of any so-called self-actualization. Another word for that might be mitdasein, being within your people, amidst your people. Dasein, mitdasein, their being. The hermeneutic calling back, and the care in holding fast to your telos, to your emergent trajectory. Aristotle would have his version of actualization would have been a teleology. Still, indeed, somewhat of the hermeneutic liberation from mere facticity. Uh, then, what are some other crucial ingredients to a good, not only a good European life, but necessary for homeostasis of our peoples? Well, the valuation of routine and appreciation of uh, skills handed down from generations, the mentoring, uh, that kind of you know guild appreciation of skills that might not be new, that may not be all that innovative, that might not be uh, cause people to hoot and holler, but are nevertheless obviously important and they're necessary, that at least some of our people master for our survival. Uh, but there's also an enjoyment of it in the predictability and the coherence of routine. And I'm not just talking about skills. I'm talking, just routine maintenance of self. The valuation of that level, it's so that level is so undervalued by Western society. Just the enjoyment of routine and normal life, and the appreciation and the respect of it, and amazingness, the amazingness of the fact that we're these walking blobs of protoplasm. Or who needs more actualization than that, really, to be, and the fact that we've survived, so which deserves some merit of itself, must have some things going for you worthy of respect, even at that level. Now, females have been traditionally allowed more to rest on the laurels of that and at that level. Not so much men. Well, their skills have to be a little bit more refined for them to, at least so that they can make money. Still, it's not going to gain you the kind of adulation and kind of approval that might show due respect by society. And there's part of the problem, maybe the biggest part of the problem. So I'm saying that our narratives somehow have to emphasize, I think probably first and foremost, the enjoyment of these levels. Then perhaps the appreciation and respect will come along with that in a genuine way. Pretty much on the same level, that is to say, on the level that anybody is capable of. We're talking about maybe not everybody's capable of every skill, of course, but they're capable of developing something or they should be capable of developing something that is engaged in maintenance. Because that's what it's about, that level. That routine is about, it's a part of maintenance. And this appreciation gives stability to our overall social structure. So important, so unlike the topsy-turvy created by the modernist disordering effect, the prohibition of our rules. So you have the structuring of social boundaries by the unionization, and then the appreciation of routine. And coherence that is going to provide stability. A stability that is very unlike the rupture created by modernity's universalism and rupture and weaponization. So we're taking the postmodern term there, the white postmodern term there. And on a deeper level, but on the same level, that is to say, the level that the entire population can participate in at any time, would be a sacrament reverence. That is to say, a deep respect for those practices which are necessary for our survival as peoples. Reverence for the ancestors, for who have brought us to this place so far. Reverence for the sacrament of marriage, sex, and childbirthing, which will carry on our people's respect for careful choice in these matters. Because we can't, concern for these matters, because we can't let our children come into a world like this and be presented with this confounding, misleading Abrahamic stuff like Christianity. We need a moral order which is really moral to ourselves, and therefore allows us to, engage respectfully and morally with out groups, to coordinate with them. So there would be this level of respect for that which is sacred. I guess it's sacred also. What's sacred is, you could say, as European peoples, is the fact that we honor the capacity of individuals to make the choice to engage in sex when they are mature enough to make an agentive choice, well informed and responsibly. That choice isn't taken away from them or misdirected. Again, with that capacity respected and that choice respected, institutionalized as a recognition of the capacity for the choice, or the capacity for lifelong monogamy, is a counter to cynicism, to skepticism, it fosters a motivation for loyalty to not only to the of individuals, but to the group, that we institutionalize this, that we recognize this as sacred. And it shows that we don't need the Abrahamics in their universal religion, which is irrespective of our European biology and species. that we don't rely on them, presenting themselves as the ones who are protecting that, monogamy in marriage, because we don't rely on them at all to do that, because they're going to open our borders and leave marriage as something like, at best, the best berth on a sinking ship. Anyway, so there's several things that could be talked about on the sacral level, and a religion which centers on these sacrament interests is necessary to begin to generate, and it will be an interplay of emergent qualities and hermeneutics, of course. And when you talk about reverence for the ancestors and historical perspective, and accountability to social capital and genetic capital, and concern for the afterlife, which is manifest in our children and our grandchildren. It will be a religion which comes about like all religions do, as negotiated and discussed between people, without the lie that it comes from some Abrahamic sky god. These three things in place, most fundamentally the social delimitation, routine, and sacrament. Then we can talk about individual, the individual self-actualization that might come out of that, and it will have not only a great deal more meaning as you have a sense of what audience I'm doing this for and who I'm serving. I'm serving worthy people, responsible people, accountable people. But because you are accountable from the onset, you're not as prone in this selfish and desperate quest for self-actualization to rupture the very boundaries of your people and any worth that your self-actualization might have in that respect. Self-actualization in this selfish, quantifying Maslowian sense being part and parcel, the pursuit of happiness and that sort of thing, with the rupture of our group bounds and boundaries and the disorder of modernity. Of course, it's been pandered to and weaponized. And again, this is going to be a situation that is this rupturing of group bounds starts with Locke's belief that group classifications were a fiction of the mind. He's presenting the British aristocracy and a liberalization of that boundary. We can agree is good. A liberalization of the British national boundary, not good. But that is something that's a part of the American weaponization, the kosher weaponization of Locke in the form of civil rights and anti-classification, i.e. anti-racism, that prohibits group classification and the ensuing disorder and lack of means of, you know, accountability to ancient cultural patterns and human ecologies. Moving to a lowest common denominator thus between peoples, as I was talking about before, in this universalism, this universal maturity, and people still having the need to categorize and classify in order to make sense. Very few group classifications remain, male and female being one. Yes, they're trying to undo that, but they're not going to be able to, of course. And but still part of the process of pandering and that to females in this situation, their one-up position in partner selection, reemerging with increased significance in this disorder, in this rupturing of group bounds, pander to from every angle. One of the things they're going to say is you can make of yourself whatever you want. They're going to this eradicaping of social constructionism to where it's solipsism. It's not social constructionism; it's Cartesianism. The idea that you are not bound to your biology. Oh, this is something that the Z-Man tried to. Another thing that he tried to say in his talk with Gottfried and Kato, that he was saying that he was following the Red Cape line that these leftists, they want to say that he was exploiting the observation that I made via Aristotle that praxis was qualitatively different than that what Jung called creatura, the biological realm, was different from the realm of pleroma of the hard sciences, in that people have the capacity for change. Well, yes, they have to change in the frame of their perspective. You can't change your biology in some Lamarckian sense, and this is not what I or any other normal social constructionist is saying. But he is trying to follow that red cape, along with whomever might be trying to propose that nonsense to undergraduates in feminist classes or whatever. But yeah, the females will be pandered to ad nauseum in this disorder of modernity. And liberalism, which maintains these open borders and boundaries, gives them, at least ostensibly, an advantage, at least an advantage in the short term to some extent. That's very appealing. They have a lot of power, and they're just calling it thugs. someone dares to try to say that, honey, you might want to apply some restraint to your ambitions and some modesty in terms of your worth in relation to a partner. Some of them aren't going to want to hear that. You're, quote, taking away their freedom. You're this, that, or the other kind of ist that they're going to call you. Okay. I know that I labored over these matters in this discussion. But the content is there, and well, let's say it was an interesting experience. So I scheduled this talk for 8:15, and then for some reason I was listening to something online, and I fell asleep. And I woke up. It was after 9:00. I was like, what the hell? That never happens, but it did. It did then, and so I was a little bit thrown off, and as a result, a bit labored or deliberate in this discussion. Nevertheless, it's not. I'm not. This is not a matter of marketing. This is a matter of getting the issues down correctly. I've done what I set out to do. If I have 2 viewers and Keith Woods has it gets 20,000 viewers, and but he's saying stupid shit like culture is downstream from social media. Then okay, I mean the culture is downstream from inanimate object or inanimate media structures. Then I'm sorry, it's your loss. But I will step up my efforts to get these ideas more broadly understood, because it is important. But it was more important that I get these things correct from the onset. Not doing what millennial woos, by his own admission, is an e-celeb. I'm not trying to be an e-celeb. Being famous, if anything, is a liability. Not interested. I do, of course, though, want to get these ideas understood, and I want to begin to implement the DNA nations as the means to coordinate our autonomy, the autonomies of our peoples. Okay, I'm going to put. We have a half hour more before Super Bowl time, and I'm going to put in the link and talk to anybody who wants to talk. I'll hang on for another half hour or 25 minutes. There's the link if anybody wants to talk. As in, not you, Claire, sorry. And want to talk. Who have we had in the so Judas Flyshy there. Claire has been here. Marshall's been here. Bully Bumpa. Who is that? Who could that be? Bully Bumpa appreciates this. Good. It should be appreciated. I was asked in the last stream who I like. Well, I like my own position by far the best. Other people are articulating things and juggling ideas in a way that I might not quite. But yeah, maybe Richard Hook, but all these guys who are mixed up with the likes of Greg Johnson and his Nazi leanings and right wing leanings. Great as they might be in some respects, and Richard Hook's article on interracial advertising, fantastic. His lawyerly position, very necessary. His abilities. Their epistemics are lacking, and that's the most important level. Coming back to guest worker, when he talks about wanting to get away from this back and forth, as he calls it, he is stuck in his Cartesian mindset when he criticizes like that, because he's not seeing the contiguity in hermeneutics that he sees in emergentism. There's a contiguity in both that's not detached by Cartesian separation or the wish to. He's chasing the red caping of hermeneutics, the misrepresentation of hermeneutics, when he sees that as a problem, back and forth. He's just reacting. And again, it's the hermeneutic realm that's going to give you perspective and dimension in a way that the emergent by itself won't quite. Now you need both. It's kind of like a dual entry, wave and particle kind of thing, or chicken and egg. Anybody want to talk? If not, I'll close up shop. I can leave this stream up for a while. I don't think that it's going to trip any wires. I might have used a few words that are not, that could be trouble here and there, but I don't. They shouldn't be. I think eventually I'll take these recent streams down, mainly to set about redoing them in a better presentation. I'll script things a little more so as to make this presentation more fluid and palatable to a general audience. Right now, I'm not too concerned about that. We're kind of forging new ground together. Having to clear out the rocks in the field, so to speak. So anyway, when Hooray talks about a corporeal self and an autobiographical self, both, I don't think that he's wrong. I don't think that's Cartesian. He's just doing a double entry because there are these two aspects of individuality. There's our inborn physical capacity, and the autobiographical narrative sense of self that is imperative for an authentic life, for coherence and sense making. And the same applies to groups. That we have our emergent group capacities, and we have our historical, and we have our narratives, historical and providing systemic accountability and breadth, and extending into the future in a way that a sheer empirical take doesn't handle nearly as well. Well, it can't without some assistance from hermeneutics. There's the link. Anyone want to join me? I don't know. Should I try to drag this out another 15 minutes? Even though I should not, I kind of want to see what Cooper Cup does in tandem with, what's his name? Yeah, I'm kind of proud of myself for thinking the Super Bowl was last week. Shouldn't pay any attention to N ball. But the team's half white. The Rams are half white, the same as they were in 1979 when they went to the Super Bowl. It's not good, but at least it is half. I'll wait 4 more minutes. There's the link. I think it hurts my feelings that me being unpopular. Well, you're who am I unpopular with? A Brundlefly doesn't like me. Gee, I wonder why. It doesn't. I've done what I wanted to do. Now it's a matter of implementation. And to whatever extent I succeed or not, if I can't, if I'm not popular, it's the loss of people who want to listen to or these idiots railing against the left. I think that Paul Gottfried is one of us. Okay. I mean, the ship will list along. The antiquated apparatus will, eke out some press. Like an old Gutenberg press. But what the old Gutenberg press couldn't do was interact. And you wouldn't be really doing what's necessary and absorbing and adopting the ideas necessary to achieve our autonomy and our systemic autonomy. It might be that people just don't want me to be the purveyor. I think that's also part of what's happened at Majority Rights is that people see a Polish name. I go by my mother's maiden name, and they don't like that. There's going to be some English people and British people are chauvinistic in that respect. It's like and then maybe my ideas that I've been discussing for a long time will be reshuffled and presented as quote their ideas. That could happen too, of course. And of course, there's some Nazis, even more so. Let's see, a Polish name in oh my God. They don't want, of course, they're not going to want me to be the purveyor of good and important ideas. But in GW's case, mostly for his sake of his fucking ego. The guy, it's like really amazing. The gaslighting that he's put me through. His calling saying that I made up my own personal definite definition of incommensurability, being, where I just caught him absolutely the most red-handed of all efforts at gaslighting. He would really have you think that you're crazy. Oh yeah, this is my personal definition of incommensurability. Unbelievable. Or that it's absolutely consonant with Thomas Kuhn's whole program. Just ridiculous. Shame. Okay. So we'll close up shop for the night. And I thank you, listeners. Been a worthwhile stream. It was a little bit awkward. The only place that I feel a bit awkward about is where I was talking about social delimitation as the most fundamental level and group delimitation thereafter. Because I'm implying the most radical fundamental situation, and so you're getting to I'm already supposing a group beyond the biological individual, of course, and beyond the mother and father even, emergent. And there's a punctuation there. We're talking about a conversation. We'll tie a knot there. To be explored further. But what I can say is that if there are not other people to discuss these matters with, that for all intents and purposes they may as well not exist. It's like, right? That in itself should tell you that the social is fundamental, most fundamental. Now, it does exist on an axis to self-maintenance and regulation. That is more and more a responsibility as you become an adult, but obviously you're born unfinished and wholly dependent on a social situation for your survival. I've provoked myself, that primordial emergence of species. Well, we're not saying that we didn't evolve. We're not denying physics and biology and separation of kinds, even of genders. Nor of emergence. So where do I get off at? Saying the delimitation of group bounds is most fundamental. Well, for a species, it is. And the most primitive humans would delimit those bounds by not recognizing what we would see as other humans as human, even. They would see them as animals, perhaps perhaps good to eat. But non-human, profoundly. Uh, that's a profound implication of anti-discrimination on the basis of groups. You're implying a non-humanness, in fact, to those who don't discriminate, who do discriminate, and you're moving things back to that monocultural primitivism. Okay, so by the things clock, we've been going 3 hours, and it's just about Super Bowl time, so I'm going to close up shop now. Thank you all for listening, and talk to you probably next Sunday at latest.